All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Autodesk Community Conversation. It's Dynamo talking to FormIt. We've got a special guest, Josh Goldstein, coming in from his sabbatical in Denver, Colorado. And of course, Saul. No Jacob, he's playing hooky, or actually he's doing a good deed. He's doing a good deed, filling in for somebody else. So welcome, everybody. Let's go to the next slide, Josh. All right. Well, Community Conversations are virtual meetups featuring expert speakers from across the community. Sessions range from deep dives, tips and tricks, live demonstrations on products such as AutoCAD, Revit, Dynamo, of course, and career stories, emerging trends, all that good stuff, and more. All experience levels, although some in the series ones, they might float and get more escalatory or more deeper into topics, but we're going to start indicating what level we think the content is for people. So we'll ask the speakers for that. Let's go to the next, please. This is the fun one. The lawyers just basically say that if we make any forward-looking statements about the future of any products or technologies, that you make any purchasing decision based on how they are today. So, while we like to talk about where we're going with things and be upfront, transparent on those kind of things, we can't actually promise because we're not the ones making all the decisions here. And yeah, that's just, anyway, next slide, please. All right, everyone's background is, everyone's line is muted to reduce the background noise. We invite you to turn on your cameras where possible. It's kind of a virtual way of feeling like we're in person. Although in September, hopefully that's going to happen at AU. We'll have a live community conversation as well as people tuning in to ask questions, because this is a conversation. You can ask questions. So raise your hand using the little Zoom down in the bottom right, the little reactions, or you can type in the chat and we will call on you and you can unmute, or you can just ask your question there and me and Sol will try and manage those. The session is recorded. A link of the recording will be emailed. Well, not emailed. Actually, I need to update that. We're posting that on the event page. So where you're registered for this event, the recording will be there, and I'll put that link in the chat. Also, there is a YouTube Dynamo office hours playlist. I'll give you the link to that too, because this is number 30. So big one. All right, next, please. My name is Sean Hurley, Autodesk Community Engagement Manager. I'm a geeky technologist located in Bend, Oregon.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome to the office hours today. My name is Sol and I am the product manager for Dynamo, so guiding its growth and evolution into the future. Also the person you can blame if there's things that you don't like. Feel free to come at me. That's cool. I describe myself as a curious human being, interested in almost everything. We'll scrap that. I am interested in everything. So bring it on. Like to explore life. Currently based here in Boston, Massachusetts, but originally from New Zealand. Over to you, Josh.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Goldstein. I am the senior product owner for FormIt. I wasn't very creative in my description, but I'm calling myself a conceptual design expert. I worked previous to this at an architecture firm here in Colorado for several years, and I was always a big fan of technology and software, and I sort of got us modernized, and instead of using only SketchUp, for example, I got us using things like Grasshopper and Rhino. But then I got an opportunity to join the Autodesk team, and I started on the FormIt product as a UX designer and worked my way up. And so I've made I'd like to say that I've made our product better, and I test it like a real architect would, making sure everything works right. And in particular, I'm very excited about our connection to Dynamo and, speaking as an employee, but not just a corporate shill, I actually think that we have a really interesting and an incredible product. And, if I were to ever leave here, I would definitely want to take FormIt and Dynamo with me. So I'm excited to show you what we've got today. And I am coming from industry, and I'll tell you honestly, the things that I do, the things that we do, and the things that I know of, I'm proud of, and I'll be honest when there are things that we haven't quite gotten there yet. But yeah, I'm excited to be with you all and sort of coming at this from sort of a hybrid customer and employee approach. So thanks for having me. All right, next slide.
Yes, please. All right, so I'm going to do a couple of slides, and then Josh is going to take it away and show you amazing things today around all things of Dynamo talking to FormIt. So this is number 30, as Sean mentioned, in our series. So shout out to everyone who's attended every single one of those. It's a big big amount of awesome stuff. Please do check out the playlist that Sean just posted in the chat. If you haven't seen some of these things before, there's a bunch of really awesome topics, mostly starting with Dynamo specifically, and now moving into the host landscape that Dynamo inhabits. So today, FormIt, and in the future, a bunch of other cool things too. Next slide, please. So as usual with our office hours series, we have roughly a 20 to maybe 30-minute presentation today on Dynamo talking FormIt, then a little bit of a live demonstration, or in this case, maybe a couple of pre-recorded videos, and then a Q&A session. But as Sean mentioned previously, please do feel free to interrupt using the raise hand. Also, you can write your questions in the chat, and we'll try and engage with you throughout the conversation, because it is a conversation as opposed to a presentation. It's much nicer when we can sort of sit here and discuss what we're seeing on screen and all things Dynamo and FormIt together. All right, Josh, over to you. Take it away.
All right, exciting. Okay, so we thought we'd start off by just briefly mentioning what is FormIt in case you're not familiar with it. I wrote this down. I would say it's Autodesk's premier conceptual design platform. We are available on 3 platforms, three clients. So there's the Windows app, the iPad app, and the web app. And we also have a feature called collaboration, where you can work in real time with your colleagues across platforms or on the same platform if you want. FormIt offers intuitive 3D sketching tools, all sorts of things that you would expect from competitor apps, 3D sketching and extrusion and things like that. But where we differentiate is we have a very powerful 3D, a solid 3D kernel, 3D modeling kernel. So in that sort of animation there on the right, you can see that I'm extruding a face downward and doing some subtractive modeling there that our competitors can't quite do. So we have a solid modeling kernel from the start. So it allows us to integrate a little bit better with Revit, although you can draw in 1 and 2D ways, just like you can with our competitor apps. But we have everything that you'd expect from a conceptual modeling application. You can organize your geometry into groups and add materials and layers and seams and all sorts of other sort of metadata. We do allow you to open and import SketchUp files. I always like to mention this because a lot of folks will say, well, where is the FormIt 3D warehouse? You can just use the SketchUp 3D warehouse and you can open up all that data. In fact, I made that model there that you see on the bottom, and a lot of those bushes and people, those all came from the SketchUp warehouse. Of course, we have great integrations with Autodesk software, including Revit and Dynamo. And we also offer solar analysis and energy analysis using Autodesk Insight. So that was a very quick overview of what we offer, but not everything, of course. In particular, FormIt and Dynamo, it's one of the integrations that I am the most excited about. Again, this is just me, but I'm calling it an incredible mix of conceptual modeling and computational design. So what's really interesting about how we connect to Dynamo is, and I'll show you how this works under the hood, but basically, once you set up a graph to work in FormIt, which depending on what you're after, it could just be adding a send to FormIt node at the end of the graph, you can run graphs and generate geometry without ever seeing the graph. So there are some folks out there that say they want to take advantage of the computational design without having to see the spaghetti, and you can do that. We now offer, in the latest version of FormIt, which is 2023, which we released a little bit earlier this year, we have 3 different types of graphs. So you can generate geometry with the geometry graph. You can use its selection, so you can select something from FormIt and then run the graph and get some result out of that with the selection graph. Or you can just use Dynamo and FormIt as a big calculator and have a data graph. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. And of course, you can build your graphs using all the native Dynamo sandbox nodes, but you can harness the power of special nodes that are FormIt only, like the select from FormIt or the send to FormIt, and there are a few other nodes that I'll talk about shortly. So just to show you sort of what it looks like, the Dynamo palette in FormIt is, and I'm just going to minimize my Zoom windows here. It's on the right. There's a little Dynamo sort of wireframe Dynamo icon along with all the other things where layers and materials and levels are. So when you click on the Dynamo palette, you'll see an area where it shows some available Dynamo graphs. This is where you can manage and run your Dynamo graphs right in FormIt. So here in this animation, I'm showing placing a stair graph that was sort of pre-baked or ready to go, so I can just place it into the FormIt canvas. And that's just a FormIt group that has a little attribute that is the entire Dynamo graph associated with it. So FormIt knows it's a special element. So we offer a series of samples. I built them all because I came from an industry architecture firm where a bunch of stuff that we would do was just really monotonous to do by hand. And I was like, wow, let's use Dynamo to just crunch those numbers, make stairs and ramps and storefront systems and all sorts of things without having to do it by hand, because it's really tiring to do that by hand. If you have Dynamo graphs on your local, your local drive or a server somewhere, you can also link local locations into the Dynamo panel. So there's a way to do that in Edit Preferences Dynamo area, and you can specify what folders you want to display in this panel. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can point it to a series of existing graphs. Also in the Dynamo Palette, there's a couple things you can do here. You can launch a new instance of Dynamo. This starts up with a starter graph or a template, and it's actually, this is a little outdated. It's a cube with a pyramid on top, but it's just a primitive basically to show you they are now live linked. So we place a little piece of geometry in the scene, and then you can modify that graph and change it and save as and do all the things that you would do. Or like I said, if you have an existing graph somewhere on your local computer or a server, you can do what's called edit source graph, and you can launch Dynamo, and you can be editing a live version of that graph. And then when you save it, it's actually going to be saved to disk. The properties palette is another place that you'll find some interesting stuff with regards to FormIt and Dynamo. So this is after you place a piece of Dynamo geometry into FormIt. When you select it, the properties palette in FormIt automatically knows that it came from Dynamo. So we display all of the inputs that were saved to that graph. Now, the caveat here is that the inputs must be marked as is input for them to show up here. And so that's just a way for you to explicitly say, hey, these are something I want to expose to the person that's going to use this downstream, even if it's you or one of your colleagues. Some of those inputs may not be worthwhile showing, but if they are, mark them as is input and they'll show up. We support, there's a special node called FormIt length string, and that's a node that we built so that you can specify dimensions in a friendly format rather than just decimal numbers. But we also support number slider, integer slider, regular number, string input, and a Boolean toggle. Also in the properties palette, so once you select one of those graphs and you see those inputs, you can change them, and then you can click the run button, and you're modifying this copy of the graph that is embedded in the FormIt model, and you're rerunning the graph without actually having to see it. So this is a really nice, again, nice way of harnessing the power of Dynamo without showing the spaghetti. But if you want to see the spaghetti, if you want to see the graph, you totally can. So when you select the Dynamo object, you can click the button that says Edit Embedded Graph, and it's going to load up the copy of this graph that is now embedded in the FormIt file. So you're not editing the version that's on your computer, you're editing the version that is copied into the FormIt model. And then from the properties panel, you can also reselect geometry that you've selected previously to run the graph, and I'll get into that here shortly. So about those graph types, like I said, there's a geometry graph, a selection graph, and a data graph. So the geometry graph is the thing that creates geometry when you run it. This requires a send to FormIt node or multiple send to FormIt nodes at the end of the graph connected to whatever geometry should appear in FormIt. The beauty of this is that you can use the multiple send to FormIt nodes as a way of organizing the geometry that comes out of the graph. So in this example here, I've got a building, and I used a send to FormIt node for the roof, another one for the glazing, another one for the floor plates. And so it's recommended that you sort of separate these out, probably by material, because the beauty is that you can paint the subgroups that are generated inside the main Dynamo group. You can paint those with materials, and then when you rerun the graph, those materials will stay. So here is an example of me. I made this graph that generates a building from some planes in FormIt. So you select the planes, and then when you modify the planes and rerun the graph, the whole building changes. But since I painted those materials onto those subgroups, the materials remain. So it's a really nice way of rerunning the graph over and over again, but still having some of that data, the FormIt materials, remain between runs. Then there's the selection graph. And so when you run this, the very first thing the graph does is it asks you for a selection. And so this requires a select from FormIt node, or multiple. You can actually have multiple. So you can say first select, like we have an array along path, select the object you want to array, and then select the array path. So the node name is going to be the selection prompt message. And you can actually, the select from FormIt node, it can accept anything. So it could be an edge or a surface or a body, or a group, which is actually what we recommend using group instances. You can select a group instance, and it's going to grab all the geometry out of there. So in this case, in this animated image that I have there, I'm actually selecting a group containing a series of planes of glass or solids of glass, and the graph then takes that and parses it and applies a storefront system to it. So, but yeah, in the selection prompt, you can say, in this case, select the glass objects. It could be a surface or a solid or a group instance. Okay, then there's the data graph. This requires, this doesn't require a selection and doesn't generate any geometry. It basically turns FormIt and Dynamo into a big calculator. So it's basically using them as a pass-through. An example that is useful here is you can actually send the FormIt levels to an Excel spreadsheet. So again, this doesn't generate anything geometry-wise, and it doesn't require a selection, but it does give you some useful data that kind of passes through the two applications. And again, the inputs and outputs are going to show up here, and these actually show up in the Dynamo palette this time, not in the properties palette, because you don't have anything selected. So the data graph is a little bit of a new beast. We added it in the most recent release in 2023, and I'll show that here shortly. And then there are a few other nodes I wanted to mention. The FormIt length string node. So this allows you to work with friendly dimensions instead of raw numbers. So I can put in 3 feet - 6 inches instead of 3.5 or 106.68 centimeters. You can mix and match the units between. So the same graph, if you have multiple dimension nodes, you can have different dimension or unit types in there, which is really interesting. I just wanted to note that in the graph, when you're editing the graph, the dimensions will always be converted to meters. So here in this case, I entered 12 feet, but it comes out as 3.6576 meters. I also wanted to note that you can use watch nodes with FormIt. So the watch nodes, any watch nodes marked as is output will show up in the FormIt properties palette. So here I've got a graph where I selected some glazing and I made some panels over top of it, and I can have a watch node that tells me what the glazing percentage is, and maybe even a little like, is it in compliance with some rule? And then there are a couple other things I wanted to mention. You can use, and this is getting into a little bit into our API. You can actually write graphs that use the FormIt JavaScript API, which is a really interesting mix of different coding languages. But anyway, this is one here where you can pop a notification in FormIt. So when the graph runs, or if it has an issue, or if you want to tell the user something, you can use the UI.show notification node. There's also a console log node, so you can display longer messages. In this case, like here's a bunch of data or a long message from Dynamo that'll show up in the script output window in FormIt for Windows. And there are some nodes that are called options nodes. So we have two versions of these. This is the geometry options here, and there's also a group options. So the geometry options allows you to specify, like for instance, a layer for the geometry that is sent to FormIt from a Dynamograph. And so this would actually happen upstream from the send to FormIt node. And we have things like set layer and set attribute. So in this case, like I have like an Excel spreadsheet that generated some spaces based on sizes, and then I basically say, okay, well, if you are a kitchen, you're going to be put on this layer. So down at the bottom there, you can see I've got 2 boxes that are on the kitchen layer, 2 on the office layer, and 2 on the medical layer. So you can control the fine geometry that comes out of Dynamo, and then you can also use FormIt group options, and these are applying to the subgroups that are generated by the send to FormIt nodes. So these actually attach to the send to FormIt nodes themselves, and you can daisy chain them together. So here I'm going to say I don't want this to come out as a mesh. I want it to be an object. I'm going to put it on a layer. I'm going to change its fastening count. So you can actually set a layer on multiple levels here, so to speak. So I can say, well, a whole group is going to be on this layer, but each individual body is going to be on a different layer. So again, we have set as mesh, set layer. You can set an attribute, a string attribute on there, and you can also adjust its curve and surface fastening count. Sorry, I think the fastening got cut off there. Yeah, so again, these can apply to individual send to FormIt nodes, or you can connect them all you can connect the same options to all the send to FormIt nodes. There's a lot of ways, a lot of customization you can do here. We do also, as I mentioned, we have the ability to connect to the JavaScript API. So you can actually call any FormIt JavaScript function and then pass in any necessary parameters. So in this example, I am using the FormIt.callJS API to get the total gross area from the FormIt model and then report that out into the Dynamograph. I could do something with that if I wanted to. And just a couple of other things more general here. The FormIt, so the way Dynamo works inside of FormIt is it uses groups. So the same group behavior from regular groups still applies. So each of those geometry graphs, or rather geometry graphs will generate all the geometry in a group, and those instances can then be painted. They can be copied, which is, you've made a copy. So it's like a component in SketchUp or a block in AutoCAD or a family in Revit. So there's going to be a link there. You can also make them unique. So in this case, I've taken one of those stairs and I've made it unique, and I've changed its parameters so it's no longer acting like its parent did. You can also ungroup them if you want, but I would not recommend that because you're breaking the Dynamo connection. So if you don't want to use the Dynamo connection anymore, just leave it. You don't have to rerun the graph. Ungrouping it means you'll never be able to run that graph again. And then I did want to mention that when you place Dynamo objects into FormIt, you're embedding them into the FormIt model, which is actually really cool because I can then send that FormIt model that has a bunch of Dynamo stuff in it to a colleague, and they can select those objects and rerun them. and there's no need to send the separate DYNs and have them map them back or anything like that. It's all embedded in the model. So this is actually a model that I built, and a bunch of things with Dynamograph stairs and storefront systems and trellises and all that stuff. So if I sent that to one of my colleagues, they could rerun all of those graphs. And this is why when you select one of those in the FormIt canvas, we're calling it Edit Embedded Graph, because it's now embedded into the FormIt model and it's not connected to the graph that came from the disk anymore. And the last thing I'll mention is that we made this multi-threaded, which is really nice. So Dynamo will run in the background. You can continue modeling while the Dynamo or the properties panels are blocked, waiting for Dynamo to finish. So here I am, I'm applying railing along the path here, and Dynamo's going, but I can still orbit the scene and I can go off and do something else while Dynamo crunches the numbers. And this also enables multiple instances of live Dynamo editing sessions all at the same time. So it's very, very powerful. Okay, that was my spiel. Any questions before I get into the live demo?
No, I think you awed them with all that information. It was great information, and I'm blown away at the amount and how I've seen FormIt since its early days.
Yeah,
and just a little miniature modeler, and now, wow,
it's a lot more powerful than it was. Yeah,
I've got a question. Those the Dyn files that you embed inside the FormIt,
yes.
Can somebody choose to not embed those as well?
No, once you place them, they're embedded. You can swap them out. So you could, if I had a new version of, like, I don't know, the trellis, I could go and hit Edit Embedded Graph, and then in Dynamo I could do File Open, and I could totally swap that out with like a new version of that or a completely different graph. But it's, once I save it, it's going to be embedded. So we're just making a copy from wherever it came from into the FormIt model. So FormIt doesn't currently support external linking, which I think is kind of what you're getting at. It's something we've wanted to add for a while, but it's a big project. So right now everything is sort of encapsulated into the FormIt model.
I was just thinking, if I had a super secret recipe, I wouldn't be acting in the spirit of community and good karma, Saul, but
oh yeah,
but I might not want to share that. I was just curious.
Yeah, that's true. You could I guess you could ungroup it and just delete, the Dynamo thing kind of goes away and you get the geometry. I mean, under the hood, it's all just FormIt geometry anyway, which I'll show. But I guess if you don't want to share your secret sauce, you could just delete the sauce or ungroup it.
Yeah, I was going to say that exact same thing. You'd already covered it in your presentation amongst the 1,000 other awesome things.
I know, it's a lot
that we went through.
All right, so I will share a couple things. So I just wanted to point out, like, so a lot of people think, sort of like Sean said, like FormIt is just like a little simple modeler, but you can really make some incredible models. You can go do everything you want and make a bunch of amazing detailed models. So you can get to this level. For the purposes of our discussion, and I just want to check, you all can see FormIt now, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I don't trust Zoom these days. Okay, so I've got a couple of things I'll show here. I just have a bunch of pre-baked Dynamo objects, but I'll place them into the canvas from scratch as well. So here's the Dynamo panel. It's this little wireframe Dynamo icon here. These are the samples. There's a couple of subfolders here I made for building masses and solid utilities, but the top level ones here, like 3D text and column grid and louvers, these are all really nice and useful. So these were pre-baked, which basically means there's a Dynamo file and there's a SAT file next to it. So when I place this into the FormIt model, it literally just places a new group, and so this is a brand new group, a new version of the stair that came out. And every time I place a new one of these from the Dynamo panel, it's not going to be connected. So that second one that I placed, if I make some change here and I say, I'm going to make, I don't know, the stair width 4 feet instead of 6 feet, and I run that, it's going to affect only that version of it. So every time you place a new instance from the panel, it's going to assume that you want to have a unique instance of that. So there's that. But if I make a copy of this and place it again, and I'm going to move it so it's not intersecting with that other thing, these two now are linked because they're the same group. And I don't know, I guess I'll change something like the tread thickness to 4 inches. And again, so this is using that FormIt length string node. So it's basically a string input. I could put whatever I want in there. It needs to rationalize out to a dimension though. So I could use centimeters or millimeters or meters or feet or inches, any of the units that we support in FormIt. They're listed here. So anyway, I just changed those stairs and these two things changed, leaving this one the same. One of the things, I know you all know this, I'm sure, but I love that Dynamo has the Boolean inputs and that you can kind of change the way the graph winds up by saying, well, I don't want middle landing, so I'm going to say false on that. And when I run this, it's going to go through a completely different part of the graph, and it's going to wind up eliminating that middle landing for me. Now you'll notice, so what happens under the hood is when I first run a Dynamo graph, like I just did, this one has just run for the first time, it took a little longer because under the hood, we've spun up a new Dynamo instance. And if I go and look in Task Manager, I'll see there's a Dynamo instance or a Dynamo CLI sort of application under the hood waiting for me to make changes to this one. There's another instance that's controlling these two and any others that I've run. So the next time I run the graph, so I'll do this here, I'll just say, give me that middle landing back. This is going to be much faster. So it just gave me that landing back because Dynamo is now spun up and ready to go, watching for changes to this. We don't have to take the time to actually get Dynamo started. So that's a really nice thing we added a few releases ago. It's like preheating Dynamo. Once you make a change, and the rest of the session is going to be a lot faster. So stairs are cool. I made a ramp because, again, like as an architect, I just wanted to quickly make some of these common elements, and I didn't want to have to do the math myself. So again, there's an option here to change, or maybe I don't want middle landings, or I want to change the middle landing length. And this is going to spin up a new instance of Dynamo under the hood. I can keep moving around inside of FormIt, and when this comes back, then there's a little message that Dynamo run is completed, and then the properties panel is unblocked again. So just a couple of things there. And then, there's all sorts of things. There's louvers, and I made a panel grid, some of these things that are just like a little tedious to make yourself. So I made a Dynamo graph for them. But let's see, I guess one of the things I'll show right off the bat, which I really enjoy, is we added the selection ability probably several releases ago. Huge deal. Always wanted to select something from FormIt and use it in a Dynamo graph. So when you look in the Dynamo panel, you'll see that the icons are a little bit different. So like 3D text, this has a little cube, which means it's a pre-baked geometry graph. It's just going to generate something. When you place it, it's going to be in some default configuration. So we let this one be 3D text. And by the way, you can do 3D text thanks to Dynamo. And since it uses the same system, you don't have to regenerate the text if you want to change it. So if I wanted to add an exclamation point, I think I already had this one pre-baked, and that one's going to give me an exclamation point. But it's nice because you can always select it and change it and then move on, so you don't have to regenerate it. But back to the Dynamo panel. So the cube means you're just going to drop some geometry in, and that just finished. But the arrow, the little selection arrow, means that it's going to ask you for a selection. So we've got array along path and railing along path and the storefront and string lights. So I'll just show you this railing along path. When I click that, it's going to pop over here on the left side, and it's going to say select a railing path, edges, or a group instance. And again, we recommend using group instances because if you selected raw edges and those edges changed, or you deleted part of them or something like that, the IDs could change, and Dynamo will then have to ask you again, like, okay, give me those edges because I've lost the ones that you had me looking at originally because something in the model has changed. But if you use a group instance, it's always going to find that group instance, and it's going to get everything out of that group instance. So here I've got an instance that just contains a bunch of connected edges. So I'm going to just give it that instance, and it's going to extract all the geometry out of that instance, and it's going to get me a railing that goes and follows that path. Pretty sweet, and this would have taken a lot longer than those 5 seconds to do manually. And the other beauty of an instance is if I go and I double click into that group instance and I change something like, I guess I'll just make this longer or something like that. So I can make a change inside here, and then I can select the Dynamo result or the Dynamo group, and I can just say run. And it's going to go and find that instance because it's still there, and it's going to get everything out of there, and it's going to find that that edge has gotten longer. So it gave me a longer little railing there at the bottom. So pretty sweet. And again, I have another series of edges there that I can do the same thing too. So there's another railing along path, and I'm just going to let that run while we go and look at something else. Storefront, again, as a former architect, I always found making mullions was just a real hassle and a real waste of time. So one of the first things I did, this has actually been a really long project for me since I joined the FormIt team. I always wanted to make something here, and when we added the selection node, really made it possible. So the storefront system just asks for whatever the quote glass object is. So it could be surfaces, solids, or as I said, we recommend using a group instance. So this here is a group instance that just contains a few planes of glass, and I'm going to get a storefront system that is now attached to that plane of glass. And again, it's going to be in some default configuration. So if I wanted to change mullion width or depth or spacing between them, like here, I'll make these 4 feet on center instead of 3 feet on center, and I'll rerun that. And this is now preheated because it's already run. So it's going to be pretty fast to have that work or regenerate. And then of course, if I want to change the horizontal, so sometimes I like to have no horizontal, so I can just make this like a really big number, like 15 feet. I don't know how tall it really needs to be, but I'm just going to say, okay, so it wasn't quite tall enough. But you can make these numbers like kind of, you know that they're not going to work. So if I say I want the first horizontal mullion to be higher than the thing is, you're actually going to not see any of those, which is maybe what I want. And of course, if I go in here, I double click and I make one of these glass pieces a little thicker. I can't remember. You can use solids here. So sometimes it's like a thickened piece of glass, or you can just use a plain. And then if I click that Dynamo group and rerun it, I'm going to get that extended to fit the glass. Pretty cool and a big time saver. And I guess I just wanted to show very quickly. So this here is this is that building. It's like a building based on planes. So this here, these are the 3 planes inside of a group instance that I used as the selection node for this building. And it's actually a sample in the building masses folder. There's a bunch in here. You can make a mass by outline. I'll show that in a second. But this is called roof planes building. And it's probably not all that useful generally, but it's good for a demo. So this is using those multiple send to FormIt nodes. So if I select this instance, or you can double click and go into the instance and it'll allow you to see the parameters as well. And if I hit edit embedded graph, this is going to give me a live Dynamo connection. So it's going to launch Dynamo. And this is a little bit of a large graph. So give me a moment here to let this run. But right now, Dynamo is connected to the FormIt session. So any changes I make in here, I can see them live. And okay, so you can see I've got the building back here inside of Dynamo, and it's connected to the FormIt session. But what I wanted to point out is at the very end of the graph, I've got the send to FormIt for the roof planes and for the glass and for the floor plates and the foundation walls. And that translates in here. If I go inside of the Dynamo group, here's the roof planes, here's the glass, the foundation walls. And the reason I did this is so that I can paint. And actually, really quick, let me just turn off my ground plane since that's cutting in a little bit. So in the materials panel, I can paint this subgroup with glass, and I can paint, oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll go inside and swing inside and paint the floor wood or something like that. And I'm sure I've got some concrete here. So there, I've applied a few materials, and whoops, I'm inside of a building. Okay, so I've just painted those Dynamo elements, and I've got the Dynamo graph running here live. So I don't know if I wanted to change something like maybe make the roof overhang a little bit smaller. Here's 4 feet, so it's going to change in the Dynamograph, and it just made it a little bit smaller in FormIt, maybe a little hard to see. So I'll change this back to 6, and you'll see it. Actually, I don't know if I executed that. There we go, 6 feet. And you'll see it'll get a little bigger inside of FormIt. So I've got a live connection here, which is really nice. Now, let's see here. I guess I'll close this. I'll save this and close it. So I just closed Dynamo. This is still here. You know, these are real, just basically FormIt objects. So I could come in here and I could modify one of these roof planes if I wanted to, and that's totally fine. Maybe you're not going to rerun the graph anymore. You wanted to use the graph as a starting point, and then you're going to manually modify the elements. That's totally cool. Just remember that when you rerun the graph, that change is going to be lost because all this stuff is going to be rebuilt. So to illustrate that, I'm going to go into these roof planes. I'm going to make one of these angled just for fun, so I can change that. And I can come out here and select the Dynamo object and say rerun. And it's going to go and it's going to grab those roof planes, and it's going to give me a new version of the building that has an angled edge. But I did lose that, that manual change that I made, which is expected. So it is an interesting mix of manual editing and computational design. Just remember that when you rerun the graph, you'll lose any of those manual changes, except for the materials that I applied on these subgroups, because I didn't actually modify the geometry. I just painted materials on the groups. The last thing I want to show here is I'm inside of this Dynamo graph, and you can see that I've got the Dynamo parameters here. I can actually put a Dynamo graph inside of another Dynamo graph, which is just wild. So if I go to the samples here and I say I want to apply a storefront curtain wall system to this glass, since I organize that glass in such a way that it's one group containing a bunch of pieces of glass, I can do that. So this is a little weird because we don't display the loading bar because you're technically inside of a Dynamo graph, so we're showing you those parameters. So Dynamo is running, but it might not be evident. But after a couple seconds, you'll get a storefront system applied to that whole building, which is like, it just blows my mind. This is like the dream for me as a former architect. I was like, I just want to apply these things and get them looking good and real for a client presentation. I don't want to spend 3 hours making mullions. And so again, all the same rules apply. If I were to, I don't know, make this even wider, do something really wild like that, I could select the building and I can say rerun. And then you're going to notice that things are a little out of sync. I can come in here and select the storefront system and say rerun, and it's going to go grab the new data from that other graph, the building graph, and it's going to give me a new storefront system based on the changes that I just made. So I just kind of updated a whole building and its subsystems in a couple seconds using FormIt and Dynamo. Really cool. Okay, that was a lot. I'll pause there for questions. I hope folks are thoroughly blown away.
So far, no questions in the chat, so it seems to be the case. Does anyone have any questions, anything you've seen that you're curious about, maybe you want elaboration on, or any sparking of ideas?
So I mentioned we have this subfolder for building masses, and I built these a little while ago as well. So if you wanted to make, say, like make a quick multifamily building, I have this multifamily along path, and you can pick, like, again, I'm picking a group instance that has a little path along it. So I'm just going to do some like programming studies using a simple path, and Dynamo is going to give me a mass to work with. And I made this so that it gives you a double loaded corridor. And again, these are organized into subgroups. So if I wanted to sort of show these as programs, I might not have a great, these are going to be ugly colors, but let's say that that's retail and this is residential or something like that. So I've got a nice little programming study, and I could go into the original line work. And so I'm inside of a group here, and it's a little hard to see, so I can hit the H key and I can hide all the context around it. So I'm just going to make one of these wings a little longer, or maybe I'll make it angled. And I'm going to hop back out, and I'm going to select that building and say rerun. And that's going to regenerate and give me an angled wing on that building. So pretty cool. So it's not just detail elements and building elements. It's also, if you want to use it for programming studies, you can totally do that as well.
Josh, we have a question from Bob Pierce in the chat. And he's asking, how about a closer look at the Dynamo nodes that do all this work?
Yes. Let's see, what would be a good graph? I think this one's not too complicated. So I'll edit embedded graph. So again, I've placed this from the samples, but it could have also been from my local computer. So I'll show you those nodes.
And for everybody who might be surprised at the way that Dynamo looks, Dynamo has undergone a visual refresh from Dynamo 2.13 version onwards. So all of the hero products, including FormIt, who released with Dynamo, have this new look and feel to it. We'll be doing a session in the not too distant future about all of the changes for that.
Yeah, and actually I'm kind of proud. FormIt is an early, like a quick adopter of Dynamo. So whenever Dynamo gets a new version, we are pretty fast to upgrade. So when you get a new version of FormIt, it's probably going to have a new version of Dynamo. Here is the select from FormIt node. So here in the library, you'll see this is the version of Dynamo that ships with FormIt. So when you install FormIt, you actually get a copy of Dynamo Sandbox that has a few special nodes in it. So under add-ons here in the library, there's a few of the main FormIt nodes. So there's the length string node, which allows you to specify dimensions. And again, that's going to come out as meters, but you can put whatever you want in that string or in that box. There is the select from FormIt node, which allows you to select FormIt geometry, and that's what I'm using here. And then there's the send FormIt node, which is going to be required for if you want to generate geometry in FormIt. So in this graph, I'm using a few of those probably at the end so that I can paint those subgroups. So I've got the first floor mass as a send to FormIt node and the typical floors mass, and that's why I can paint the bottom red and these other elements blue. And then I think I've got one more send to FormIt node, which is the hallway mass, which is why this little piece of hallway here is its own separate group. And I can actually like move these up and show you. So this is its own send to FormIt node here. But it's really cool that we support multiple of those at the end of the graph. And then here are, so a couple things. You'll notice I've got some group options here. So I've decided to not let these be set as a mesh. So in FormIt, we have meshes and we have objects. Objects are the things that allow you to like, so if I just place a primitive, this is a regular object. I can, grab its edges and its vertices and modify those. But if I generate something in Dynamo that's really big or really complicated, you might want to use a mesh. So the default is mesh just for performance reasons. But if you don't want that, you can set that as false. So I've got a FormIt group option here saying I don't want any of the send to FormIt nodes using meshes. I just want them to be regular objects. And then underneath here, we have the JS API. So you can call your JavaScript API, and that requires a function name and some parameters. These are all documented on our website if you want to go look at those. You can console log, you can call a custom JavaScript function from a plugin. It's a little complicated. I don't want to get too deep into it here, but here's where you can also show a notification in FormIt. And then there's the geometry options where you can set an attribute or a layer on geometry. And then there's the format group options, which is what I'm using right here. And so set as mesh, set attribute, curve count, faceting, or surface count and curve count, and then a set layer. And what else do we have in here? Oh yeah, so we have that 3D text, and we actually made a custom node in here. So there's some utilities as well. But basically these top three are probably what you're going to be using the most often to get friendly length strings, and then selecting from format and sending to format. So that's what typically those will be. The send to format will be at the end of the graph, and the select from format will be at the beginning of the graph. And then I think in this case, I also have watch nodes. So there's a watch node here that's just set as is output, so that when I look at the graph in the properties panel, well, it's in a loading state right now because Dynamo is running, but you can see I've got some typical floor area and total floor area watch node outputs that are at the bottom of the properties panel there. So when you're running Dynamo live like this, we don't allow you to change the properties here because you're already changing them here. And this does allow you to change things pretty quickly. So if I wanted to say change the number of floors, again, as I showed previously, if I make that change here, you're going to see that change happen very instantly inside of format. So I've got this live connection going, but I can save this and close it. And then when I select this, the properties panel will be unblocked.
Nice.
And I think,
Josh?
Yeah, go ahead.
We've got a couple of questions in here. Are we ready?
Yeah, totally.
We've got Tracy asking, once a client has selected an option generated in FormIt, do Dynamo generated masses export to Revit and pick up Revit materials as easily as before?
So all of this stuff that you see here, even if it was generated by Dynamo, is really under the hood, it's just FormIt geometry. So the same, so if I were to save this model and then load it into FormIt, I would get all the materials into Revit just like you would normally as if you made these geometries yourself. They aren't, it's going to be we now are doing linking in FormIt and Revit 2023. It's a link, so it's an import instance. So there's not a whole lot you can do in terms of like apply. You can apply wall by face in there, but you have to be in the family editor. There are some limitations there, but basically it's the way it would work as if you generated the geometry yourself. But you know, things like the storefront system, it's just geometry, so it's not going to like turn into a Revit storefront system, unfortunately. It's just FormIt geometry. But all those materials will come across, and all of the, I mean, it'll look exactly the same as you would expect in Revit, but it may not have some of the smarts. We've
got Michael asking, how do embedded Dynamo objects react when sending someone using the FormIt free version?
So if I were to save this model and open it in like FormIt Web or FormIt iPad, they'll look exactly the same. There's no difference there. Again, it's almost like I generated it myself. The difference is when you select them in the properties panel there, the free clients don't show anything. It'll look as if it's not a Dynamo object. First, I mean, there's reasons for that beyond the free versus pro thing. It's Dynamo's Windows-based application, and FormIt for Windows is the only one with the Dynamo connection. So iPad and web wouldn't be able to run Dynamo even if you were a pro subscriber. So we just kind of, the properties panel will just treat them as if they're just a regular group, and you won't see any properties, but you can modify those objects as if they were regular FormIt objects. And then the next time somebody opens it in Windows, they can rerun that graph. So it would be just like this. I can go and modify the inside of these Dynamo objects. Yeah, you just can't rerun the graph in web and iPad. So other than the smarts of knowing it came from Dynamo, there's nothing really different here. It's just a regular group with regular geometry. It happens to have an attribute that tells the Windows app, hey, this is a Dynamo object, so show the inputs.
Super cool. All right, I think that's the end of our questions so far. So if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Apart from that, Josh, was there anything else you wanted to show?
I might as well.
5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know that. So I think you've said that you've shown this before, but I built this building. I called it Encode because it's encoded with Dynamo smarts, and I really like it. So this entire building is looking at this one path right here, this little path that has these sort of striated edges. This whole thing is generating this Dynamo building, and I already ran this. So I'm going to make this into a curve, and I want, like, let's say I want to make this whole building curved. So things like this soffit here is looking at those edges, so that's going to become curved. The glass is going to become curved. So all I have to do is select these and rerun them. And unfortunately, there's no way to rerun, like batch rerun, but it just takes a few seconds to grab the individual elements here, and they're all looking at that series of edges that's in a group. So as I grab each one of them, like the louvers are going to update and the floor plates are going to update. And so within a few seconds, I can basically batch change this whole building to become curved instead of angular. And I think that, so this is just an interesting example of like Dynamo generating multiple pieces of the same building. So there it took, I don't know, whatever, 25, 30 seconds to completely change the facade of that building, all using the selection node. And this, everybody's looking at that single group instance of curves, which I think is pretty sweet. And then the only other thing I guess I can show is the data graphs. So here I've got a very simple, weird sort of building mass. And I've run this already. So there's a Dynamo Graph that is, I've run, and I got it from my local library where I send the levels to Excel, and I've already got Excel open here. So I've got some level areas. So this is just exporting. It's actually using our API under the hood. I'm using the node, and I can show that here in a second. But basically it says, give me all the levels from FormIt and put them into the Dynamo, into an Excel spreadsheet. So I've got 9 levels, and you can see the biggest one here is like 6,500 square feet. So if I make a change here in the model and I make that much larger, and then I'm here in the Dynamo panel and I can just click run, and it's going to update Excel. And now Excel tells me that the largest level is 9,400 square feet. So this is a really nice way to sort of use Dynamo and FormIt as a big calculator. And if I wanted to, I can right click this. Oops, actually it's this one, edit source graph. So now I'm editing the version that's on the disk. And in case you wanted to see how this is working under the hood, here comes Dynamo. It's a pretty simple graph, actually. So I gave it a path, just a string node, gave it some options here, sheet name and such and such. So the call JS API here, this is really the meat of it. It's the format, or the function is called format.levels.getLevelsData, and this is in our on our website. If you go and look, we have a whole documentation. All of our functions are documented, and then the parameters have to be sort of in a JavaScript object. So it requires a history ID, which is, it's going to be 0. It's basically the main sketch. Levels are in the main sketch, and sort by elevation true. And then the JS API gives me basically a JavaScript object, and I can parse that and turn it into a dictionary and sort of extract all of that, and then turn that into an Excel, export to Excel. Or you can also use export to XML. But basically, yeah, that's this, and it's got a bunch of series of inputs that I've marked as is input, so that in the properties panel, and this is going to give me an error because I just kind of killed it in the middle of its spiel. But yeah, so I've got a Dynamo graph here that's using just data, and so when I rerun that, it gets the updated information from FormIt and sends it to Excel. So it's a really interesting way of connecting. You know, Dynamo now knows what FormIt objects are, and of course now FormIt can write directly to Excel, which wasn't really possible before. So we're using Dynamo for some things, and Dynamo is able to connect with us and understand our geometry system. So it allows a lot of really neat workflows, geometry or otherwise. That's pretty much all I've got. There's a lot more. There's a lot of nuance and complication here, of course, but I just threw a lot of information at you. So a lot of good things to parse through.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate the overview and the dive into FormIt Dynamo today. Is there any other questions that anyone on the call has who wants to ask? Feel free to come off mute and ask them live if you're brave, or you can ask them in the chat too. Totally up to you.
I did want to mention also that FormIt is a polyhedral modeler, so it's like every curve is actually a series of edges under the hood. So we've got the ability to adjust how that happens in Dynamo. So there's one of those group options is a curve and surface fastening quality. So here I've got this one set really low to 10. So this is generating it's supposed to be, in Dynamo, it's a circle that's lofted, but in FormIt, it's going to turn into sort of a polygon. So if I wanted to raise this, and if I double click in here and hover, you can see it's pretty coarse. And so I just wanted to point out that you can control how these come out now. If I want to make this like 80 instead, and when I rerun that, you'll see this becomes a lot more smooth. All right, there you go. It's a lot more smooth. So because Dynamo is really great for generating curvy, swoopy objects, and you can absolutely, it's better, I would say, than doing that in FormIt. Since in FormIt, you'd have to delete it and rebuild it if you wanted to change it. So just keep in mind that if you do swoopy objects, you can control how those are faceted inside of FormIt, make them so smooth you would never know they're faceted under the hood. Okay, that's probably it. Oh, and there's also I think a lot of architects out there like string lights, so I did make a string light sample. So if you select just an edge, you can generate festoon lighting, if you will. And so actually they're a little hard to see, but there I just generated a few little string lights. And then of course you can select that and regenerate it with more lights or whatever you want. So things like this that are they're kind of hard to build regularly. So use Dynamo for that.
Super cool.
That would be wicked cool, right?
Or radical.
Yeah. Oh, there's the lights.
There they are. Yeah, I just made more of them. And inside of here, you can paint the actual light bulbs yellow, and you can paint you can paint the cables black or something like that. So
Wow.
there's some materials for you, and a bunch of string lights. That would have taken a lot longer to do by hand for sure. And we've got some options in here if you want to do distance or by quantity. So maybe I want, yeah, you can, again, I love Dynamo that you can sort of change how the graph works just by using a Boolean option. So it's very, very powerful. I'll go back to 2 feet. There we go. There's a fewer lights along the catenary curve.
I think Beth summed up this session. The blown mind emoji.
Good. Happy to hear it.
Agreed. 100%.
I would never go back. If I were to leave Autodesk, I'd never go back to our, like Sketchup, but this is just so powerful. I would want this to follow me through my career. So
it has evolved so much. It's powerful.
Yeah.
It's amazingly, for a conceptual modeler, it's super powerful. It goes into Revit. You can interact with Dynamo for generative designs. Holy cow, why would you ever want to just pull facets and then have those chunky little pieces end up, never mind.
Right.
Whew. This is
totally
awesome.
Agree. Oh, good.
No more catch up for me.
I spent too many hours of my life pushing and pulling things.
Right.
Exporting and then fixing and redrawing from scratch. Yes.
Exactly.
Wow.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me nerd out for an hour. A lot of fun.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Josh. I think we've got a couple of slides left to tail off the session today.
All right.
Awesome. All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We hope you learned something. We see some fun emojis and some great questions in the chat. So I think a few people did. Hopefully everyone did. As per the rest of our Dynamo office hour sessions, there are more upcoming. So we have a really awesome session around Dynamo talking about Alias. So this is like another modeling engine that's typically used with automotive or aeronautical industries. We've got a special guest for Michael Gunther Jeffries, who is working on that team and understands this implicitly, upcoming next. Then we have a Dynamo talking to the robot structural analysis and advanced steel with Thomas Fidala and Stephen Gumpert. That's upcoming too. And then we start our generative design series. So again, a repeat session with John Pearson, who is the author of the Rhythm package and the Monocle extension, is going to come join us for generative design part 1. So hope you can join us for all of those, and we hope you had a wonderful time.
Can we move that July to August? Because we take a break in July.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, maybe I made a mistake.
No worries. No worries at all. Yeah, we got to get a break for people.
True that.
Although I do enjoy seeing John. So
always
cat emojis and everything. So, all right. Well, got a few things here to close. First of all, when you exit here, you'll get a survey link. Please take just a minute or two and give us some feedback on what topics you'd like to see, what things we can improve. Just your general feedback, even if it's a little blown mind emoji, love it. It's always good to know how we're doing and how we can improve and what content you're interested in. If you'd like to be a community conversation speaker, that is available to you. I mean, anybody can do that. So reach out to me. We can discuss your topics. This is for everybody. Let's go to the next slide, please. I provided in the chat some of the links to some community resources. And so that's our forums, our community groups. I would encourage you to check out the Community Voices blog. That is by community for community. And I would love to get more Dynamo or even FormIt customers blogging. We've got Dana DeFlippy right now, she's our only Dynamo in there, but we're heavy in Revit. There's a lot of Revit content, but I'd love to get to see more. This is, for the community, by the community. The Community Journal just gives you updates and everything that's going on. We've released the June schedule for Community Conversations. I just had Sol just talking about some of the ones upcoming for him, and then we'll build out the fall. We'd like to see it at AU. Student Group Hub, everything. Don't miss our future Community Conversations. we'd love to have you. So next, please. I think that's it.
All
Thank
done.
you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Josh. Man, I can't believe you came in on your sabbatical.
Yeah, no problem. I also had COVID a couple weeks ago, so I'm like holding in coughs, and it's all right. It's for the community. I had a good time. This is a really fun topic to talk about. So thanks for having me.
Oh, you definitely shared your knowledge and passion. That was awesome. I was blown away. That was like, wow.
What
I
aim
can't
for.
believe what it does now. Yeah, that's
It's a
crazy
different beast.
awesome.
Every year it gets way more powerful. And of course, if you haven't tried it in like a couple of years or something, I mean, that's decades in tech world. So worth revisiting it if you haven't touched FormIt in a little while. It gets better and better every year.
I'm updating right now. So
Oh, good man.
this is happening. So, formit.autodesk.com.
That's right.
All good stuff. All right. Thanks again, Josh, for presenting
Thank
today.
you.
Really appreciate it. And thanks
Of
everyone
course.
for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
See you.